All right. Good morning, happy Thursday, and welcome to Coding with Jess. So today we're going to be continuing our exploration of RedwoodJS. Our journey through the RedwoodJS tutorial began several weeks ago with part 1, where we spent 2 hours walking through the basics of setting up Redwood. We continued a week later going through part 2, another 2-hour live stream, in the middle of which YouTube Studio went down. So hopefully we don't have YouTube go offline today while we're working. But it's been so far been a lot of fun, and we're about 3.5-4 hours or so into experimenting, playing around with RedwoodJS. And as I've said in past videos, my focus in these videos is really on the developer experience of RedwoodJS. What would it actually be like to build a thing with Redwood? And since that's what we do on Coding with Jess, is you code with me while I build a thing, that's what we're going to do today as well, just working on RedwoodJS. So I fully expect us to get through the tutorial today. Most likely where we're going to spend our time is on the actual deployment of RedwoodJS and kind of wrapping up the tutorial, and then we'll talk about maybe some next steps about what we might do with Redwood after that. So glad you're here. Without further ado, let's dive right in and get started. So like every like every Coding with Jess, we're gonna run do this in 4 25-minute increments with 5-minute breaks. Since it is like a 2-hour long session, it's really long, and so I appreciate you hanging out with me. So let's go ahead and start a Pomodoro so we can stay super focused in the next 25 minutes and see what we can get started. All righty, so go ahead and start my Pomodoro. I have not been playing with Redwood over the last several weeks, so I'm not cheating and kind of like working ahead on the tutorial or anything. So this is actually like a direct continuation of part 2. So even though it was a few weeks ago, I haven't been like studying up or anything. So I'm going to pick up exactly where I left off with RedwoodJS in the tutorial before, and we'll see where we can go from there. So I believe last time we were in the forms section. So let me go ahead and open up our VS Code, where we have our Redwood blog that we've been working on. So you may remember a couple things about Redwood. One, we're going to want to go ahead and, I believe, start. Nope, it's like yarn Redwood, if I can remember the yarn command here. Let's see. Yarn Redwood dev, that's right. All right, let me go ahead and bump this size up a little bit so you guys can read that. So we're going to go ahead and start up our development server in this tab. All right, and our next tab over, I'll just have like a terminal that I can get to, that I can access things in GitHub. Again, this actual repo that I'm working in right now is available at jessmartin/Redwood blog tutorial. So if you want to check that out, there is the repository that has the code that we're actively working on right now. Shouldn't really matter that much because you've got the actual Redwood blog, or sorry, the Redwood tutorial to follow along with where we're building this blog. Okay, so let's jump over to our Redwood blog app and see where we were. All right, so currently in our Redwood blog, you can click into different about and contact pages, and then you can click into individual posts and go to a single post page and back to like a list of posts. So that's kind of the functionality we have right now. What we were working on is the ability to submit a form, email.com, and some message to you, and click save, and then have that actually post. So we're in the middle of this everyone's favorite thing to build, forms, and actually getting our submit handler working. So one of the things that we explored last time at the very end is we were talking about how awesome validation is in RedwoodJS. So validation is one of those necessary evils that hopefully you're actually spending time doing it on your applications, because it adds tremendously to the UX, the user experience. Very difficult to use a site that requires certain things of you but doesn't give you validation and tell you what's wrong when you enter things incorrectly. So one of the things that I was pointing out is that there's been form libraries over time, like Simple Form in the Rails world, as well as some form libraries in the React world that roll all of this stuff up for you. And Redwood is taking advantage of one of those forms themselves as well to basically give you the ability to do validation in a declarative way on each one of the fields. And what do I mean by declarative? Well, let's look at one of these forms in our contact page. and walk through what that declaration looks like. So rather than having to write code to check on specific things are actually valid and that kind of stuff, I can take advantage of the fact that these validations are already available from the form library. The form library, whose name I am forgetting at the moment and will come to me shortly. I'm sure we'll be able to see it in here in a second. But they've integrated this form library that actually will allow you to declaratively say things like validate that a specific field is required and that you have to enter it. As well as doing certain things with styling the error messages that appear when that validation is not met. So there's numerous ways that you can handle these validations. We even looked at the way that you can do a pattern to do a regex match on things like an email address. So this gives you the ability to do more than just sort of simple validations. I imagine there's probably also the ability to write custom validators. But we haven't quite gotten there. So let's see where we are right now. All right. Here we are at the end of our form section. So this is that everyone's favorite things to build form part of the tutorial. By the way, before I go any further, I should just note that I have not yet updated Redwood to 0.5.0. So that might be something we might do at the very end of this. I believe I started this on 0.3. And so there might be some breaking changes in going from 0.3 to 0.5. We'll see. We'll try it out at the end. All in all, this is just a learning experience for me of learning how Redwood works. And this is definitely kind of a throwaway application. Let's get through the tutorial. And what I'm hoping to do immediately after this is actually build something real with Redwood and kind of get the experience of what it would be like to take something to production. Okay, so our form doesn't actually submit. Let's see if we have this this form on submit in here yet. So down here in our form, actually it'd be up here in our form, we have an on submit. And currently you'll note that our on submit only does a console.log. So all it's doing is logging out, writing out the submission data to the console. Validations are pretty cool. Let's move on to actually saving data. So it looks like what they're going to ask us to do is add a new database table. I don't believe that I've done that yet. Let's go to our API/Prisma/schema. So this single file contains the entire schema of our backend database. So we can at a glance kind of page through all of the things that we have in our database. Right now, you'll see there is no model for contacts. So let's go ahead and create one of those. As I've mentioned on past things like this, when I'm going through a tutorial, I try to type everything out. And the whole point of that is to kind of get the syntax into my fingers. Certainly it would be easy to copy paste over from the right over here to the left and make this go faster. But the purpose is not to go faster, it's to actually learn, right? And so part of it is just getting your fingers used to the actual things that you're gonna have to type. So one of the things that I'm noticing here as I'm typing all this stuff out is this just kind of odd syntax that is, okay, so it's basically, again, I'm not a GraphQL expert or a Prisma expert in this case, but this is basically giving us the name of the variable and the type of the variable, or I should say column really, since this is a database schema, and then the type of the schema. You can see that this one has, this one is actually going to be the primary ID of the table, and it's appropriately named ID, but I would assume that that's what the @ID decorator, I think that's what those things are called, will do. And then that @default auto increment means that this will start at a number, an int of like 0 or 1, and then will increment automatically as I insert things into the table. For most of you, that's pretty obvious, but worth calling out. And then the date time will default to now. So there's a little decorator there where I can actually specify a default value for this column every time created at gets set. So I don't really need to set created at myself. So most likely what I'm going to be setting is these three things: name, email, and message. And you'll notice that they actually correspond to what we had on the contact page in terms of the name, email, and message form fields. There they are: name, email, message. Okay, let's keep going. So to mark, and then they mentioned this in the tutorial as well, to mark a column is optional. You can suffix the data type with the question mark name string. Okay, cool. So we don't actually have any optional ones here, But if we wanted to make something like, say, email optional, we could apparently come in and just say, you know, optional email there. Very cool. So next we go ahead and create a migration file. So this was a step that we've gone through in the, I believe it was in the cells maybe portion of this, or side quest, how Redwood work with data. Earlier in the tutorial, we actually went through this process. I'm glad we're going through it again, because I definitely don't have it memorized by any stretch yet. So we're going to say yarn Redwood. Again, Redwood is our little fancy little CLI tool that we get along with Redwood. Pretty sweet. Yarn Redwood DB save. And so apparently that's going to create this migration file. Migration files are kind of interesting. That's interesting. Why is it asking me to name the migration? All right. I'll just say the comment will ask you, how about create contact? So apparently I can use spaces. They're specifying, or they're recommending this is the name, create contact. That seems reasonable. Create contact. And that will run the, as they call the DDL commands to upgrade the database. What that really does is, I guess that DDL stands for data description layer, I'm guessing. But the what this does, you can see what it actually creates. It creates a directory that is timestamped for the migration. This is similar to the way that migrations were handled in the Rails world, and I'm sure that has been copied quite a bit. So let's go to create contact, and that will actually open this fancy little directory here. So yeah, over here on the left, you can see it creates a timestamped directory with the name of the migration. And then inside that migration, I pointed this out before, it's got a README, which describes the migration. So I could actually add some additional data. I could add some additional description of like why I chose to do this migration. And then it has the new schema that's being created. And again, if I go back one directory to like the previous migration, you can actually see here is what the schema looked like before this migration. So it's kind of interesting that it stores this time capture, I guess, of the schema as it progresses over time. Then it also creates the steps.json file. I won't dive into that just yet because I have a feeling that's just doing a bunch of Prisma migration stuff. Okay, so that now we have that migration created. Here's the command that will actually run it on the database. So yarn redwood db up, very similar to the up and down migrations in the Rails database. So pretty nice there. Okay, so I do the up, and then that actually gives me some nice output here. Let's see. Nice. So it says, here's the changes to be applied. So this is basically a diff of this schema Prisma file and the previous schema Prisma file. So it's going to apply these changes. It gives me it actually lets me know what kind of database actions took place, which I really love. One database action. I also love the fact that they use emojis here. The rocket emoji being one of my favorites. If you follow me on Twitter, you'll know that. Done with one migration in 105 milliseconds. So it gives you actually some timing on how long that migration took to execute. And then it also gives me a quick reminder of how I can actually access that that code in my, or that column or table in my code. So nice. As a, like, man, the CLI tools are just top notch in terms of, so far already, the documentation there is fantastic. Okay, so next we're going to create the GraphQL interface to access this table. All right, we haven't used this generate command yet, although the scaffold command did use it behind the scenes. Okay, so let's type this out. Yarn redwood generate an SDL for contact. So just as a really quick reminder to myself and those of you who might be watching of like what is an SDL. So I think that is the service description layer or something like that. I'm not sure what SDL exactly stands for, but the important thing is we created one before for the blog post table. So let me see if I can remind myself where that would live. I would imagine that would live on the API side. Remember, our directory has two giant levels in it, API and web, because this is a mono repo that contains both the front end and the back end. The front end being web, the back end being API. So an SDL, I would think, would live in the back end source, probably in services, maybe. Oh no, we were just talking about this being GraphQL. So there it is. In the GraphQL folder, since this is the GraphQL interface to that table, here's where the SDL lives. So I would expect another one when I run this command to be generated right here. All right. And it does. It generates another one right there. So you might notice that just there, this is like a meta comment on how to learn things well. You might notice that I could have read ahead and discovered this. I was not reading on the under. I basically stopped my reading right here at this line, this yarn redwood generate line. And the reason that I did that is that one of the best learning techniques is to try to guess what is going to happen before you actually see what happens. So this forces you to kind of synthesize information that you've had previously and like guess at an outcome. And the learning technique is called generation, where you try to generate an answer before you actually have studied what the answer would be. Because after you studied what the answer would be, then you're testing your recall of that data point. But generation is actually a more powerful way. And then if you're wrong, you can like assess why you were wrong about the way that it worked. So anyway, it worked the way I expected it to work. It actually put a file in the GraphQL folder, contacts.sdl. That's that thing I should probably go find out what it stands for. Service delivery layer, service definition layer, something like that. And this is the GraphQL schema for the new table that we created. So you'll notice that it has a contact. It has the exact same data types. Notice that they are bang. I think that means required. Bang required in order for this type to be valid, effectively, for it to be a valid contact. I would imagine that those would be string question mark if we had made them optional. But again, this is me generating, right? I don't know the answer because I don't know GraphQL, but I'm guessing that that's probably what's going on here. And then there's a query where I can actually look up contacts. Man, now that I look at this, like this is kind of a bad name for the form, calling it contacts, because contacts to me implies people or like persons, users, that kind of stuff. We probably should have called this contact form or contact submissions or something along those lines. Just a note for maybe I'll go and offer a PR to the tutorial to kind of clarify that. But anyway, so we're going to do this contact. You can see that there's a query here that allows us to query contacts from the database. And then there's a contact input, which allows us, I'm assuming, to write something to the database. So pretty cool. Okay, just like the let's read this now that I've kind of like inferred what was happening. Let's read through what they actually say is happening in the tutorial. So just like the scaffold command, this creates 2 new files under the API directory. Ooh, 2 new files. I missed one of them. Let's go see what the other one is. It writes the contact SDL, and it also writes in the services file a contacts.js and a contacts test. What does contacts.js do? Okay, so this exports a service called contacts that allows us to search the database for contacts. Okay, so we got this find many command that's now exposed that I can actually import in other places and use that to find contacts. Okay, yeah, contains your app's business logic. So this would then be using our GraphQL layer, our GraphQL schema to actually do a fetch. Okay, I think. At some point I'm going to want to draw this out because there's still like tracing data from the front end all the way to the back end and all the technologies involved. Like I feel like I need an architectural diagram of like, this is the front end and this is React, which is then using a form library, which is then using Apollo, which is then hitting Apollo on the back end, which is then hitting that Apollo GraphQL API, which then kind of magically transforms into Prisma at some point. So like the handoff between those different technologies, I think is going to be important to actually attain mastery of a framework like this that ties them all together. It's really nice that it gives it all to you by default. Like Ruby on Rails had this same kind of thing going for it, where Rails could kind of hide from you what was really going on behind the scenes. And unfortunately, to really attain mastery at Rails, you really had to start to like pick apart what was going on behind the scenes and learn. So I think that's something I'm going to have to look at. Okay, so let's see. The generate SDL command introspected the schema, looked at the schema file we created a contact type containing each database field in the table, as well as a query type where you could query contacts, which returns an array of contact types. Okay, what is create contact input and update contact input? So I did not see those in my GraphQL file. I bet that that is because I'm on an older version of RedwoodJS. So we have contact input, but there's a create and an update now. This is probably, I'll have to do some digging, but that I'm guessing that my older version is hurting me here. So let's see. Let me do a real quick check to see what version. If I can't remember if I upgraded to 0.4 last time. 0.5 just came out yesterday, I believe. Yeah, I'm on 0.25. All right, so one of the things we're going to want to do at the end of this is kind of, yeah, I'll just acknowledge that there's a difference there, and we'll move on. Let's go ahead and read through it though. What does create contact and update contact input do? Redwood follows the GraphQL recommendation of using input types. Okay, so that's something we're going to want to go read about at some point in mutations rather than listing out each and every field that can be set. Okay, so they basically split the input type into a create and an update. And in create, it is required that you have all three. In update, you only have to have one field. Notice how it's missing a bang here at the end, so that those fields are not required. And if you look over here on our contact input, okay, so this contact input, they're probably using this for both create and update. And the disadvantage of that approach here is that this create contact input, using this for creation, allows GraphQL to enforce the presence of specific fields of data before creating them in the database. Cool. Okay. Yeah, so I think that's a nice change between 0.25 and 0.4 or whatever when that came out. Yeah, in update contact input, you only want to update a single field or two fields or all fields. The alternative would be to create separate input types for every permutation of fields we wanted to update. That doesn't feel right. We felt like having only one update field, while may not pedantically the absolutely correct way to create a GraphQL API, we felt like it was a good compromise for an optimal developer experience. Having only one update input. Fair enough. I like it. Redwood assumes your code won't try to set a value on any field named ID or created at. This is something I mentioned at before, by the way, is that ID and created at are somewhat like reserved in the sense that we know from sort of by convention, right? And so as opposed to configuration, that ID is our ID field that auto increments, and that created at is something that will get automatically set on the back end. I'll leave these out. Your database allows either of those to be set manually, or so you can update, create contact, and add them if you want. Create and update. Very cool. I'd recommend leaving them out. If you want to update created at for some reason, probably best to just create another column and call it something else, because it probably represents something different than created at. Notice that there's no updated at. It's kind of an interesting choice to me. It could be because updated at is being tracked at the database level now in some way that I'm not aware of. I don't think that's the case. It actually depends on the database that you'd be using, but interesting choice. Updated at and created at were like the pair in the Rails world for a long time. All right, so since all of the database columns were required in the schema.prisma file, they're marked as bangs here. Yep. Remember, schema.prisma syntax requires an extra question mark character when a field is not required. Yep, we already talked about that. And bang when it is required. There are no explicit resolvers defined in the SDL file. I don't exactly know what resolvers are, but I can pretend like I do and move on. In this case, we're creating a single mutation that we'll call create contact. Where's our resolvers file? So contact SDL, API source, well, contact SDL. Interesting. So we don't have a mutation here. Huh. So I'm assuming that this is also left out because of the version that I'm working on, that create contacts. But I thought we had one for posts. We most certainly do have one for posts. Did I write this? That's interesting. So I'm gonna go ahead and copy this one in, and I'm assuming that it should have been, and I'm gonna do two things. I'm gonna copy this, And then I'm going to make our contact inputs actually match what is generated here. Again, I'm just basically, I think I'm playing catch up on Redwood versions here, which is fine. All right, so mutation. So this mutation, let's look at that mutation. It accepts a single variable, a create contact input, which is one of these, which is going to be required to have all three, the name, email, and message. So that's it for our SDL file. Let's now define the service that will actually save the data to the database. This service includes a default contacts function for getting all the contacts from the database. Let's add our mutation to create a new contact. Okay, so now we're going to be actually adding some new stuff. So let me see how much time. Looks like we are almost at the end of our break here. We are. Okay, let me see if I can quickly add that. Actually, what we're going to do is go ahead and do a commit here. This would be adding contacts to the database. Go ahead and push that up. Not using branches here. I think it just committing straight to the master branch at this point. All right, so when we come back from, we're about to take our first break. I'm going to take a 5-minute break, and when we come back, we're going to be working on the resolver that is going to, yeah, is that what it's called? Or the service that's going to allow us to actually use that create contact and update that. All right, so starting a break. I will see y'all in just 5 minutes. Yeah, we're going to take a break for 5 more minutes. Alrighty, let's see. Nope, not working. started here in 1 minute. Yeah, so one of my hard drives is not. Yeah, we'll just have to improvise. 45 more seconds and we'll get started. All right, so we're back. We're going to start another Pomodoro here and keep going through our tutorial. So when we left off just a second ago, we had created a new contact table in the database, and we were working on creating the next thing we're going to be working on is actually using that contacts database to write something to the database here. Interesting. Again, there's a slight difference between our file and their file. So it says, let's define the service that will actually save the data to the database. This service includes a default contacts function for getting all contacts from the database. Notice they have an import here that I'm a little surprised to see. I would have expected that import to be automatically done based on things in the services directory. Just the way that I've seen Redwood working so far is it seems to automatically import stuff. But let's go ahead and write our create contact. So as they mentioned, they already have one services function here, which allows me to fetch contacts from the database. So now we're actually going to go through and create a new contact in the database. So let's create a new function. It's a const function. We pass in a single value that is input. I'm not sure why my prettier is not running right now, but it isn't. And we're going to return from this function db contact.create, and we're going to use data input. All right, so this function is going to take a single argument input, and then it's going to call this db contact create, which I believe is this mutation maybe. Not actually sure how that's connecting things two together. So contact has find many. Interesting. Maybe this is some convention over configuration thing. I'm not sure where this find many function and create function are actually coming from. But I would imagine that is wired up to, this could be Prisma actually that we're thinking of right now. It's actually wiring up the database create file to work with our service layer here. Not sure. So this would be actually, the mutation would be calling create contact, and then the create contact method is right here, I believe. And then that create contact calls db contact create, and I bet that's a Prisma function that then you can pass the data in as input. So wiring things up to Prisma. Yep, and that's what it says here in the tutorial actually. Thanks to Prisma, client.js, it takes very little code to actually save something to the database. This is an asynchronous call, but we don't have to worry about resolving promises or dealing with async await because Apollo will do that for us. Nice. So Apollo, which is responding to this GraphQL query here, will then take care of the async to make sure that this function actually completes the write to the database before it returns the value of this mutation. Kind of cool. Before we plug this into the UI, let's take a look at a nifty GUI you get by just running Redwood dev. All right, so apparently this is already running at 89.11. Let's go there real quick and pull that up. The GraphQL playground is pretty nifty. I don't know if you guys have seen this before. I've used it a little bit in playing with GraphQL, but it's a really nice way to check and see if your different GraphQL queries are set up appropriately. One of the things that's really nice too is it has this docs table, which actually shows you auto-generated documentation on how to use the various types that are available on your GraphQL API. So one of the things you'll notice is that it already has this create contact, which is, I believe, this right here. And it's inferring on this input that you need all three string, email, name, email, and message when you create one. Pretty nice little tool here. You can inspect the schema at a glance. So here are the mutations: create contact, create post, update post, delete post, post input. Yeah, this is pretty nice little tool. Let's go back over to the tutorial and see if there's anything they would specifically like us to do there. Yep, it's the complete schema as defined by our SDL files. Very cool. So as I mentioned, you can take a look at the schema here under schema.prisma. Although this is going to be the database schema, right? This is the schema of the actual tables in my database. While the this schema tab would probably be the best way to explore the entire GraphQL schema in one place, especially since right now we have it split across multiple SDL files in this GraphQL directory. Easier for taking things in, but definitely a lot longer to read through. Creating a contact, our GraphQL mutation. So let's go see if there's anything else they'd like us to do here. Looks like not. All right. It's a great way to experience with your API. Okay. So our GraphQL mutation is ready to go on the back end, so that all that's left is to invoke it on the front end. Exactly. So now we've basically we created a new table in the database. We have the Prisma layer that represents the schema to that table, which is kind of how we did the table creation. Then we've created the GraphQL layer, which will be managed by Apollo, which will create that new table through the Prisma layer. And now we need to interact with things on the front end. So now we're going to switch out of our back end and API over to our front end in web and go through, let's see, source, pages, contact page. And contact page has in contactpage.js, we're going to create a new function called create contact. Okay. So first we start by defining the mutation as a constant that we call later. This can be defined outside of the component itself right after the import statements. Okay, so right after the import statements, outside of the component, we're going to create a new create contact mutation, because this is going to write some GraphQL, and then we're going to insert the GraphQL that is going to get written here. So mutation, create contact mutation. It's going to take an input, create contact input bang, and inside the method we're going to call create, or inside the GraphQL call, we're going to call create contact. We're going to pass in the input and the ID. That's surprising to me. Oh, I think this is saying it's going to return an ID, I think. So basically after this mutation is called, return an ID. Because that's not being called, declared but never read. Yep. So yeah, this is a mutation so this is GraphQL syntax for a mutation that creates a new contact. So we could probably even paste this into our fancy little playground over here, and then hit return, and then hit play, and it would probably try and create one. Yep, variable not provided. Cool, so we didn't specify what the input was here, or the dollar input. Okay, so we referenced the create contact mutation when we defined in the context SDL, passing it as an input object. Yep, we said that already. So next we'll call the use mutation hook provided by Apollo, which will allow us to execute the mutation when we're ready. All right, we're going to have an import statement to import this new hook. So I'm assuming this is a React.js hook that we get from, import, that we get from Redwood that is wrapping a hook that is provided by Apollo for using a mutation as part of a submission. Let's see what that does. So inside our actual, now we're inside of our component, our React component. And so here's our const create. This looks very much like defining any hook in React, which I learned a lot about hooks last week, by the way. Super fun. Maybe I'll do a video on that at some point. So this is creating a method, a callback method, that will call this use mutation create contact. It already has the GraphQL that'll get passed to it. And then we have the ability to use that create elsewhere in our application. So create, as they mentioned, create then becomes this function that we get back from this hook. It invokes the mutation and takes an object with a variables key. Variables. I guess you just have to know that's the structure of the hook, that it is expecting variables with input, another key with an input inside of it. I wonder if there's a way to make that more obvious. I know that a lot of these hooks are async calls that pass you just have to know what the function signature is, but or the method signature, but it seems a little less obvious than I'd like. All right, so create is a function. It has variables and input key, so we're going to have to actually get the data, I would assume here in our on submit. So, yep. Okay, so here we go. In our on submit, we're going to continue to console log out, but we're going to call create. Remember, we have to pass in an object with a variables key that has an input key underneath it, and then the input key has to have the hash of all the data. That looks reasonably good. Cool. For whatever reason, Prettier seems to be running on this file, which is nice. Let me make sure if I save that. Yeah, very cool. Thankful for that. Gosh, I love Prettier. Okay, so then that's going to do the return. So now we can update the on submit, and let's see if that works. So coming over here, name is required, Jess, email, jess@jess.com, and testing, and hit save. And what just happened? Oh, I haven't updated the on. No, I have updated the on submit. Let's see if we have data. So just walk down to the next one. If you recall, form gives us all the fields we need. So we did that. So try filling it out. You should have a new contact in the database. You can verify that in the playground. Let's go verify that in the playground then. We will want to use a query on contacts. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. It'd be nice to be able to like copy paste that one thing instead of having to look at the image and break that out of there. Although maybe that's trying to tell me that I can get there. No, it's just an image. All right, I'm just like trying to click the thing. Is it gonna click? Query on contacts. And in those contacts, so we want to query contacts, and we want to get back all the contacts in the database, all of them. And the form will have, it's going to be a type contacts, give us the ID, the name, the email, the message, and the created at. Oh look, we've got some like nice autocomplete in the browser here. That's pretty cool. And there we are, jess.com testing. Sweet. Yeah, the one thing I don't love about that is I didn't give you any feedback whatsoever that it actually worked, that it saved the thing to the database. So let's see how we might do that. Improving the contact form. It works, but it has a couple of issues. Clicking the submit button multiple times will result in multiple submits. Absolutely. The user has no idea if their submission was successful, and if an error occurred on the server, we have no way of notifying the user. So let's address each of those issues. All right, the use mutation hook returns a couple more elements along with the function to invoke it. Oh, nice. Okay, so yes, I love the destructuring nature of hooks that I learned about last week. So we're going to be able to take create, Yeah, no kidding, Thomas. Like that is the autocomplete in GraphQL Playground is ridiculous and so nice. All right, so now from this hook, I'm also going to get back a loading and error function as well that I can use. Let's see how we might go about using those. So I'm guessing that, oh, interesting. Okay, so now we know the database call is still in progress by looking at loading. An easy fix for our multiple submit issues would be able to disable the submit button if the response is still in progress. We can set the disabled attribute on the save button to the value of loading. Disabled to the value of loading. Okay, so I'm guessing loading is returning true or false based on whether it's loading or not. I guess that's what it was trying to tell me. We know the database, if the database call is still in progress by looking at loading. So loading must be like a Boolean, or a function that returns a Boolean, I should say. All right, so our save button then, let's go down to save here. It's a submit. So I can then say disabled equals loading, which like will pull and that function we had up there. May be hard to see a difference in development because the submit is so fast, but you could enable network throttling. Man, I love the Chrome tools. All right, should we try that then? Let's see. I'm going to pop up my inspector. We'll go to network. You can go to, let's see, where was it exactly? Let me see if they have a screenshot for me. It's not super helpful. There we are. There's throttling. So we'll do slow 3G and then see how that works. Boop, 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 boop. Submit just 2. Testing again and click save. Nice. It is indeed. It was indeed disabled. That's interesting. I'm thinking about what React had to do in order to disable that while it was loading. I'm guessing Apollo is doing something fancy there with the callbacks, with that callback function, so that React knows when that function's value has changed, and it can automatically re-enable that button. That's awesome. Yeah, Thomas says it's a Boolean. It's an Apollo thing. That is very cool. Love that. All right, let's jump back over to the tutorial and keep going. So that was using our loading state. Let's see what they're going to give us with error. Again, remember we were saying if there's an error on the back end when you're trying to submit the form, you need to be able to see it on the front end in the browser somehow and let the user know that they need to try and resubmit. So here's how we display server errors. Oh, here, let me go back one more step here. We can let the user know their submission was successful. Use mutation can accept a second argument containing an options object. Oh, very cool. Okay, so this, I'm guessing this is also an Apollo thing. I get this use mutation, so I can then submit another function called onCompleted, and then we can actually do something in here. Probably would want to actually update the UI, but an alert will be sufficient for now. We'll be in touch shortly. Oh, nice. Prettier transformed that string for me. Man, the more I use prettier, the more amazed I am by it. Okay, so let's see what that would do. So if we go through, and now you can kind of see it refreshing the page there. We're still on slow 3G, so it's going to actually go pretty slow here when I do this submission. But when we get back, we should get an alert that that the data was submitted successfully. And there it is. We'll be in touch shortly. Nice. So again, like I said, you probably would want to actually update the UI rather than using an alert, but this gives you the basics of what you would need. You've got this callback function. So we could actually update some value in the UI, which would then show a like successful submission or something along those lines as well, which would be pretty cool. Okay, so continuing to go on, that's handling loading and then letting user know when the load is complete or when the form has been successfully completed. So let's handle server errors. So next we'll inform the user of any server errors. So far we've only notified the user of a client error. a field that was missing or formatted incorrectly. But if we have server-side constraints, form can't know about those. Sure. So we can't do all of our validation on the front end. And furthermore, like what happens if your database goes offline? What happens if something happens in transit and for whatever reason you actually aren't able to save that thing to the database? So we need to let the user know that, hey, this did not save. You've got a problem here. And as any good developer knows, never trust the client. Yep. So that's a great point too, in the sense that the client is in the developer's hands. They can modify data using like inspect tools and different things like that. And so we want to be on the other end of the API. We also want to be ensuring that no bad data gets in our database, even if it somehow got past our client-side validation, which totally makes sense. Okay, so with this database side validation, we're going to need to let the user know if somehow their input failed database side validation. So let's see how that might work. So let's add a validate function to our contacts service. So let's go ahead and now we're going to have to switch from the front end back over to the back end. So open up our API directory, go to our contacts service, which is right here. Currently it's got the contacts query message and the create contacts. And we're going to do some validation here in addition to we're going to do some validation here as well when we do this creation, and then we'll see how we might kick some stuff back. So apparently we're going to create a function called validate that takes the input from the front end. So if the email, and we're going to do a more strict email match or regex matcher, I'm guessing, looks like. We're going to take, so if it has email, which is it should, and the email matches this regex, definitely going to copy paste that regex. There's only so much value to getting things in your fingers. Copy paste, manually copying the characters in a regex, not that valuable. Okay, so if that were to happen, then we're going to throw, this might be the very first time I've seen the usage of throw in JavaScript. Betrays how little I've used JavaScript for production applications, but I've used throwing exceptions in Java, in Ruby, in C# and numerous other languages, but I don't think I've ever used it in JavaScript before. Okay, so we're going to throw an exception. It's a custom exception called user input error, so I'm going to have to import that here in a second. You see the import here at the top from the RedwoodJS API. And then that user input error is going to it's the constructor for the user input error takes a couple of arguments, right? Takes the message of what went wrong. Actually, that's not even the message. Well, it is sort of interesting. So it takes basically a description. I'll say description instead of message because we're going to get messages down here. It takes a description of what went wrong, and then it has a messages array that lets you return errors on specific fields. So at least I'm inferring that anyway. Email is one of our fields, right? And so I can actually say this message is probably going to pop up in the UI prefaced with the word email, I'm guessing. So email is not formatted like an email address. So I'm guessing that this is auto going to pop up, but we'll see how they're going to handle it on the front end once we've written this validation on the back end. All right, as I mentioned, I'm missing an import here. So let's go ahead and do an import of user input error. I'm just certain in any minute now I'm going to come across something that's not available in Redwood 0.25 and it's just going to break entirely. All right, bringing in user input error. Let's save. And that looks good. Now we actually need to call this validate function before we could create the contact in the database. So in our create contacts function, let's go ahead and validate the input. And then nothing else needs to change because this validate input function will throw an exception, which will halt execution of this function, right? And bubble it back up. It will throw an exception when it fails to validate that thing. Okay. Errors are thrown. Let's see if they have anything on that for us to read. Nope. I think I understand it pretty well. First, validate the inputs. We already capture an existing error in the error constant that we get from use mutation. So we could manually display an error box on the page with somewhere containing those errors, maybe at the top of the form. Okay. Okay, cool. So this is similar to the way flash messages used to work or still works in Rails. It's kind of seems like what they're going for here. So let's go back to our form. So now we're back on the front end again. And we are going back to our component. And at the top of our, inside our JSX here, we're going to add a new something or other to our form. So if there is an error, so if this function right here has a value to it, it's not nil, it's not false, not falsy, then we're going to write out this div to the browser or to the DOM. All right, so we're gonna have a div that has everything in it should be red because things are going wrong here. And then, oh no, let's give ourselves 5 more minutes to wrap this up. And I think we'll be at the end of this error section. So I'm just gonna extend our Pomodoro by 5. I'm sure y'all are all okay with that. All right, give ourselves 5 more minutes here. So this div is going to have, oh, prettier. What you doing to me? All right. It's going to say, we couldn't send your message. Okay. It's an interesting way of saying that. And then error.message is the other thing it's going to output. So error.message, you might remember, was actually a hash of messages. So it's going to do something with these messages and email to transform them into a message that can get outputted. You notice this is message singular, not messages plural. So there's some transformation happening between the front end and the back end, taking this user input error and transforming it into a way that we can just output it seamlessly using error.message. I would imagine that this is probably one of the things that's actually RedwoodJS code, given that it's doing doing something that seems extra to Apollo or any of those things. And it also is so eerily similar to Flash messages in Rails that I'm guessing this is something the Redwood team wrote. All right, so let's see. To get a server error to fire, let's remove the email format validation from the client side. Okay, that works. So we had our little, remember I mentioned that validations can happen on the client side, including custom validations like this one down here on line 72. A pattern. So I'm going to go ahead and remove that one. Email is still required, but it no longer has the validation. So let's go ahead and update our blog here. Let me disable this throttling. I'm just fully online and close that. Make this a little bigger. And so Jess is my name, and this is not an email address. Is our email address that we're submitting, and hit save. And so we now expect this to fail, and we expect to get some sort of error message right up here. Where's that going to be? It's going to be just underneath, just above our name, so below our menu here. Nice. We couldn't send your message. GraphQL error, can't create new contact. Interesting. So that is not actually, okay, there's the error, can't create new contact. Oh, I bet the next thing we're going to do is be able to read the messages. So this is indeed the message, as I stated earlier. That first parameter to this function is the message, and then the messages array we're going to be able to iterate over to actually put a specific message on a field that has a specific error to it. Very cool. So I kind of see where we're going here. So yeah, we couldn't send your message. GraphQL can't create new contact. Ain't pretty, but it works. Seeing a GraphQL error is not ideal, and it would be nice if the field itself was highlighted like it was when the inline validation was in place. Well, here's the last trick that Form has up its sleeve. Tell you what, we've got a minute 30 seconds. I'm going to go ahead and start my break right now. And as soon as we get back from this 5-minute break, we will take a look at using RedwoodJS's forms that that we've implemented to actually highlight the email address as the field that has the problem, as well as outputting the error message that we put in the back end here. So we'll take a quick 5-minute break, and then we will be back to finish up that part of the tutorial. See y'all in 5. Okay, let's see. Pomodoro break is winding up here. Anxious to get back into it and finish digging into our error message handling. So as I mentioned right before we left off, we're going to make this improve this form so that it actually shows us which form field has an error and sends back a specific error message for that field. So let's see how that works. Remove the inline error display we created with @error. Okay, so we're going to remove our flash-like error from the top here. Boom, that is now removed. And replace it with form error. Okay. Form error. Passing in the error tag. Nice. So they kind of had you sort of implement form error, and then they showed you, hey, we already have this built in to RedwoodJS. I like that style of, let me show you what we'd have to do if you had to write it by hand, and then let me show you how easy it is since we have it built in. Very cool. All right, so let me hit save here. Oops. There you go. We'll go ahead and delete this. Form error is much easier, nice little declarative way to handle this, but we're going to need to go ahead and add that to our list of imports. So form error is also going to get imported. Okay, I love that they chose lavender blush. That's an excellent color. Solid idea. Oh, it makes you miss Meteor. Yeah, Thomas says, I was just thinking this is just like Rails or Laravel, but for JS. It makes me miss Meteor. So I played with Meteor back in the day as well. I was working on a web framework called Virtual World Framework, VWF. Virtual, let's see, whoops. Virtual World Framework, which is basically like this cool, man, what was the, oh, it's virtual.w. I think it's virtual WF. Been so long I can't even remember the organization name. I think I go here, Virtual World Framework. Oh, it has dashes in it. Yeah, so I was working on this framework back in the day, back in like 2014 or so, when Meteor was on its rise. And it had a lot of the similarities to Meteor. So it was really fun to actually be working on a framework that like automatically synchronized the front end and the back end. And Redwood does a lot of this for you, which is freaking brilliant. Yeah, Meteor was really cool, but it never really caught on. And I think a large part of the reason that Meteor didn't catch on is because React was so good. And Meteor on the front end was not as good as React. So the fact that this is kind of rebuilding Meteor out of things that are all individually better than Meteor, than like individual components in Meteor, is really exciting. So yeah, I hear you, Thomas. Okay, let's see, how am I going to do this? So form error is like a nice declarative way to get that error syntax up at the top. Let's go ahead and do that one more time and see what that looks like. This is not a real email address. So I click save. There you go. Ooh, now we're getting somewhere. So remember how I was saying that it didn't actually spit out the fields that I wanted. It didn't iterate over messages. So that the form error does automatically iterate over the messages and spit them out to the screen. Again, it's very much like the Flash messages of bygone Rails days. Not that those days are bygone for everyone, but yeah, days when I was messing with that stuff. So we get that error messages at the top saying that something went wrong in plain English, and the actual field. What? Where was the actual field highlighted? No, it wasn't. It's not highlighted. Boy, you crazy. What did I not do right? I clearly did something wrong here then, because let's see. So our form, error. Okay. So in the form itself, I need to include the error object as one of the things we pass into that form component. And when I do that, I should get a highlight. Very cool. And then I get the error message down here is not formatted like an email address. So cool. Yeah, love that. So one more thing, since we're not redirecting after, oh, by the way, just to mention, looks like form error has some different styling options. That is exactly what I would expect, so that you can actually format what gets spit out to the screen. So you can do the wrapper, the title style, the way that you do list items, list item class names. So this allows you to style this form error up however you might like. Personally, I thought that the lavender blush was a nice touch, and I don't think any further styling will be needed just yet. Okay, so moving on. One more thing. Since we're not redirecting after the form submits, we should at least clear out the form fields. This requires we get access to a reset function. Okay, that's part of the React hook form, but we don't have access to it when we use the simplest usage of form like we're currently using. So React hook form has a hook called useForm, which is normally called for us within form. In order to reset the form, we need to invoke the hook ourselves, but the functionality that useForm provides still need to be used in form. Here's how we do that. Okay, so we're going to do an input form. Let me read through this before we implement it. So we're going to import a new hook called useForm from React hook form. We're going to take our contact page, which has a bunch of form methods in it. No, we're going to create, okay, so inside of our contact page component, right over here, we're going to use that form and get back the form methods. I would have expected some kind of parameter or something to get passed here, but I'll just keep going. Unless this is just like a container of methods. Okay. Now, finally, we'll tell form to use the form methods we just instantiated instead of doing it itself. All right, so form methods. This just feels strange, but I guess I'll get used to it. And then next we can call reset on form methods after the alert box is shown. Okay, so we basically are getting access to this sort of grab bag of functions using a hook. So let's go ahead and do that. I'll write the import first. Import useForm. Probably move that up a line so that it's with the other hooks that we're getting. And this comes from React hook form. And then inside our contact page, we're going to do a const form methods equals useForm. All right, that's going to give us back that form, that grab bag of functions. And then when we declare the form here, we'll want to say form methods equals form methods. So we can kind of override the default form methods in this React component here and pass in these other ones. Why these aren't used by default, I'm not exactly clear. Like, why do I need to? It feels like I need like a deep handle into the reset, and instead of doing, yeah, something about this feels weird. I only learned about hooks and custom hooks literally last week, so this is me kind of it could be that I'm just not getting it, and if that's the case, that's fine. But that does feel a little bit strange. But on our on submit here, our use mutation, where when it completes the create contact, we do this alert. And so as soon as that alert has shown, we're going to do a form methods.reset, and that should clear all of our form methods. So here we go. Is this Jess at jess.com, testing again and again. Save. This should clear all of our, after I hit OK on this alert, which is synchronous, it should clear all those form fields, which it does. Very nice, Redwood. Okay, so at this point, we can still put that email validation back in place if we wanted to. So let me go ahead and do that. And then let's do a commit real quick. And let's see, I think that is the button maybe. Boom, there we go. Cool, so let's go ahead and commit this. We now have submit the form data to create a contact. Very cool. All right, is there anything else they want us to look at here? React hook form provides a bunch of functionality that form doesn't expose. Okay, so there is this React hook form thing that we're probably going to want to go look into in a little bit. if you want to get that functionality, you can just call the use form yourself, but make sure to pass the returned object form methods. It feels like there's a cleaner way to integrate this, but like I said, we'll have to see where they go with that. All right. All right, so we're on to the next section. We're down to 2 sections remaining, well, aside from wrapping up. So we have administration. Oh, cool. This is something that I was hoping we would do, which is just nested routes. So this should take just a second, and then we get to the thing that I was really excited about today, which is deployment. And we'll have about 40 minutes to hopefully do a Jamstack style Netlify deployment on this sucker. We're gonna have to both set up Heroku and for our backend Postgres instance, and then set up a Netlify front end for our Jamstack front end deployment. I've done the Heroku side of things many times. I've never done the Netlify side of things. So this is probably going to be something that, yeah, it's going to take, we're going to have to go fast. So let me like hustle through this nested routes thing. So just as a reminder, what we're going to do here is we have our routes that allow us to modify posts. So if you go to posts, you can get a route here. You can create new posts. We'll probably want those to not be at a top level route like /posts. They should probably be under something like admin posts or something like that. So let's see if we can make that change. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up the routes file, and the tutorial is going to walk us through the magical change to make that happen. So apparently we're going to prefix all of our posts routes with the word admin. Admin / whoops. All right. And let's see, are there any other changes that we would need to make here? That looks about right to me. So now it should all be nested under admin. So if I go to admin posts, hey, look, it's already reloaded the page. If I go to new, there it is. I would imagine that under edit, well, they don't even have a link. Yeah, there we go. Show admin post 1. Cool. That looks all good. Let's do another commit real quick. GCA move admin, or yeah, admin routes under /admin. Okay, push that up. All right, now the real meat of what I was excited to get to today. We're finally there. Deployment time. Yeah, Thomas says regarding that use form, use mutation is heavy. I'd probably move it into a custom hook, but still. Yeah, it feels like there's an opportunity here at the RedwoodJS level to have the form component automatically bring in the things that you need from React hook form or React form hook, whatever that was called, and then expose that reset function as a return value from. But again, this is me like not having a ton of experience with that. Okay, the whole reason we wanted to start building Redwood was to make a full stack web apps easier to build and deploy on the Jamstack. You've seen what building a RedwoodJS app is like, but what about we try deploying one? Man, this takes me back to when I was using Rails 1.2.3, Rails 1.2.3. I spent about a week or two building my first app, and then a full month trying to get it deployed. So hopefully this takes us 20 or 30 minutes to get this deployed. I know the deployment story since 2005 when I was doing that experimentation with, or 2006 when I was doing that experimentation with Rails. I know it's gotten a lot better. So let's see what this is going to do. So basically they're going to want us to do to set up a database on the back end. Sorry, not a database on the back end. They're going to want to set up a hosted database in the cloud that we can use to store all of our stuff on the back end. And so we will, let's go the Heroku route just because I already had that an account set up there. I'm going to create a new app. Log in. Okay, so we lost OBS for a second there. I've had problems with OBS quitting in the past, and I couldn't remember what was one of the things that triggered it. I believe it was actually 1Password that has triggered it in the past. So we definitely, hopefully. Wow. Well, that is a bizarre, absolutely bizarre turn of events there. So it turns out that using using 1Password causes OBS to crash. Why, I have no idea. I'll dig into that later, but I'll try to avoid using OBS on the rest of the screencast to hopefully avoid crashing OBS. I'll try to avoid using 1Password. Completely bizarre. Like, computers are mind-numbingly annoying at times. Okay, so here we go. We're going to create a new app in Heroku. New app. And this app is going to be called RedwoodJS blog tutorial backend. Believe it or not, that's available. Great. So click create app. There we go. Go to the resources tab and then click find more add-ons. Yep. So we're going to probably be adding a Postgres add-on here. There's Heroku Postgres. I would imagine that would be the one they want us to use. Yep, it is. Let's click install. Search for an app. We will do Redwood. Provision that add-on. Again, I'm really hustling through the RedwoodJS, or sorry, through the Heroku side of things, because I'm really interested in getting to the Netlify side of things. Thomas, sorry for the interruptions in service here, and for those of you who were watching the recording later. Okay, so click the Heroku Postgres link to get the details page, and then the settings page, and finally the view credentials page. All right, so I'll have to mute my screen in just a second while I'm copying and pasting these credentials. Because we will not want that password to be exposed, but we did all the steps above so we could copy the URI listed at the bottom, that URI. All right, it will be really long and it will scroll off the side of the page to make sure you copy the whole thing. Let's go create a Netlify account, and I'm going to do that through GitHub. Thankfully, I don't have to use 1Password to refetch anything so that my thing doesn't crash again. All right. This is my first time in the Netlify interface, so let's see how this goes. I should be not quite as fast as I am at moving around Heroku. Alrighty, now just authorize Netlify to connect to your Git hosting provider, which is GitHub. Authorize Netlify. And now I can search for our repo, Redwood. Says I need to configure Netlify on GitHub. Let's go see what that's about. Install Netlify on Jess Martin. All repositories, install. No. Okay. If I use 1Password, it will crash OBS again. So I'm going to have to pull up 1Password on my device here. What a bizarre. Okay, type in the password, because I, of course, use... No! So somehow, without using 1Password, just the action of typing a password in to GitHub, I imagine it somehow instantiated 1Password in the back end and killed it as well. Awesome! Wow. Computers. Okay, let's search for Redwood and just hopefully I won't have to do any more password entry. Insane. That is absolutely insane. All right, so now we have deploying settings, build options, and deploy. Yeah, sure. They didn't really give me much guidance here, did they? It says Netlify will start building your app by clicking. When the deploy settings comes up, you can leave everything as the default and click deploy site. Okay. Doing it. Deploy site. Just do it. Determined Euler 307A00. Okay. Click the deploying your site link to watch the logs. Site deploy in progress, maybe? Building. But stuff is happening. Cool. So while that's happening, let's just read through here. Go back to the main site page and then to the settings at the top, then build and deploy environment. Yep. So we're going to be putting in the environment variable for our database URL. So I'll just, in just a second, I will hide the screen while I copy that password back and forth and add that environment variable. Let me just look down and see if there's anything else that we need to add here. Add one more variable, binary target, and set that value to Red Hat OpenSSL. This is for Prisma to know which client libraries it needs. And in this case, it can run on AWS Lambda. Okay, so I'm going to do the binary target one first, and then I'll do the database URL. Let's see. Deploy log. So we're going to go back from deploys. I think it said settings. What was it? Settings, build and deploy environment. Okay. Settings, build and deploy environment, edit variables. All right, let's do that is not it. Binary target is this. Man, I hope this works. And the new variable. All right, give me just a second here to hide my screen. All right, I'm gonna go copy our Postgres information from Heroku. Where was that information? It's under settings. Okay. Still pulling up the environment variables in database or in Heroku. All right, got my URI copied. Coming over to Netlify, copying, pasting it in. And then now I need to type in database URL, click new variable, save. All right, those, I think it's now sufficiently obfuscated that I'll bring back up our desktop. And here we are. Okay, what step are we on in our Redwood tutorial here? So we have currently set the binary target and the database URL. So our Netlify application is now connecting to a database in Heroku, we think. And the last thing it says we need to do in Netlify is enable the beta build process. Eventually this new build process will be the default for new sites, but for now we need to manually enable it. So head to this link, which I just did, and click enable. Success, you're all set. All right, go to the sites in the top nav, click on your site again, and now to the deploys. Sites in the top nav, go to my site again. I'm here in my deploys. It says auto publishing is on, deploys from master. Open the trigger deploy drop down on the right and click deploy site. Where was that exactly? Trigger deploy. Where was that? Deploys. Okay, go there, trigger deploy, deploy site. Okay, that is happening. With a little luck, it will be complete successfully. So you can click the preview button at the top of the deploy page and we'll let that go. All right, so we have a 5-minute break. Let's take that 5-minute break while Netlify is doing the deploy. So let me go ahead and click start break here. We'll come back and finish our last Pomodoro of the day, 25 more minutes to hopefully play around with our deployed application in production. So I'm super excited to do that. And yeah, I'll be back in 5 minutes. About 30 seconds here and we'll get right back into it. Right back. Yeah, Thomas, thanks for that. I think that might be the case. I was thinking about how the hotkeys are working as well. All right. I would like to start a tomato. Very much like to start another 25-minute timer and see what we have with Netlify. Okay, so we're in our last Pomodoro of today, and we may have completely finished the the RedwoodJS tutorial. Let's go find out where we're at. So right before the break, we went ahead and clicked build the site. It says Netlify build complete and finish processing build request. I see some red, but for the most part, it looks green. So let's hit preview deploy and see what we have. Oh no, error, network error, response not successful. Status code 502. Let's see if there's something that we need to do over here. Overview is available. Rollback is supported, unsupported. Did it work? If you see empty under the about and contact links, it probably did. Interesting. Oh, because there are no posts. That would make sense, right? So it's trying to read posts from the back end. They're not there. So that actually makes sense. About and contact are there. Those are our two static pages. Let's see if we can actually get to /admin. 404 not found. Of course, because we don't have anything at /admin. /admin posts. Oh, something went wrong. No. You're seeing empty because you don't have any posts in your brand new production database. So head to admin posts. If you view a deploy via the preview button, notice the URL contains a hash of the latest commit. Netlify will create one of these. Yeah, this is one of the things I love about Netlify and Jamstack is that you effectively get automatic staging servers for every single commit. Such a cool thing. If the deploy failed, check the log output in Netlify and see if you can make sense of the error. If the deploy was successful but the site doesn't come up, try opening the web inspector and looking for error. Site definitely comes up. Seems like this might be, let's hit the inspector real quick to see if there's anything relevant there. Yeah, I feel like the 502, so it's not reaching GraphQL. GraphQL backend. So I don't think this is an actual error connecting to our database, but actually connecting to the GraphQL layer, which should have been deployed via a Lambda function, I believe. View functions in production. Let's do that real quick. There's GraphQL.js. Uncaught exceptions. Prisma client did not initialize yet. Please run Prisma generate. Okay, so it looks like our Prisma client is not working. So that's where we're having the break right now. Prisma. I think I followed all the steps. Prisma knows which client it needs. Let's see, we enabled this plugin. Let's see if we can debug this. We've got about 20 minutes to see if we can get this working. Again, here is our deployed application. Let's think this through. So on the front end, the React and RedwoodJS version are like things about this app are working. So we can see static content like the about page. We can see the static form. I would imagine we will not be able to submit because this will actually try and hit the GraphQL layer, which Prisma does not appear to be working on the back end. So if I hit save here, yeah, I get absolutely nothing. That's weird. I would have expected like an error from the back end or something. Okay. Uncaught exception. Prisma client did not initialize. So let's head over to the RedwoodJS. Also, it's probably worth taking the time to upgrade to 0.5. and see if that just sort of magically, automatically fixes this. So why don't we do that real quick? Let's look at our commit history. We have nothing in our commit history. Let's see if we can do an upgrade to Redwood 0.5 and see if things just start magically working. Package JSON. Let's go to latest here, 0.5, and then run yarn or like npm install. While that's running, I'm going to go ahead and head over to the Redwood forums, which I've seen have been really active, and it looks like a great place to try and find out why things would not be working. So let's see, let's go ahead and paste that error message that we saw. It was Prisma client did not initialize yet. Here we go, a 502 error when deploying via Netlify. Try running yarn Redwood DB generate. Normally you shouldn't have to run this command manually, as it should be happening automatically if yarn Redwood dev is running and serving your site. Huh. Okay, for some reason, that was kind of my suspicion, that yarn wasn't setting up the database appropriately, but again, that should have happened automatically. Let's see how we might run that. MIT Kyoto says maybe the Netlify plugin for Prisma doesn't work. That is possible. Remember, we've had a new release of Prisma come out in the last few weeks. Let's go ahead and see. Also, still getting the new version of Redwood here. As soon as that's done, I'm going to commit this and then redeploy with hopefully 0.5 working seamlessly here. It seems like there was a breaking change on 0.4, so I'm also going to pull up this blog post and put it right here. Not blog post, forum post. And then I want to look real quickly for 0.4 because I believe there was something about breaking changes here. Changed, upgraded Prisma 2 to preview 0.25, introduced a new relation syntax which is not compatible with previous migration files. If you have a deployed app and need to migrate DB changes, see this issue providing a workaround. That actually might be the case because we do have some migrations in our previous thing. So that might be the problem. MIT Kyoto, I would not know how to swap out a different plugin if that were the actual solution. Delete the migrations folder, drop /migration, create, save a new initial migration. So yeah, it could be that our migrations here under API /Prisma /migrations could be that these new migrations will not work with the upgraded version of Prisma 2. So, okay, looks like we're done with our install of the new version of Redwood. So I'm going to do yarn Redwood dev and see if it at least runs locally. Fingers crossed. Here's the important part, is generating the Prisma client, and we've had a major upgrade to Prisma. Failed to compile. Okay, so we pretty sure that that has to do with our this is bleeding edge software, people. This is what the kind of thing to be expected. So let's see. Change detected, rebuilding. All right, let me clear the. So I just cleared the CLI and ran it again, so I can know when I'm starting at the top here. Babel's core lib. Couldn't find Babel plugin macros. Weird. I'm not seeing any of my code in here. Here it is. No. This is in my npm modules. Or sorry, my node modules. But I'm not seeing any of my own code that I wrote. Users, Redwood blog, API source. Okay, there we go. GraphQL.js. Let's go there. GraphQL.js. Okay, so this file was generated automatically. So my guess is, in order to get this running with 0.5, I'm actually going to have to recreate this from scratch. Although, let me see. What did he say in this post here? Changed, added, fixed. How to upgrade to v04. Update your RedwoodJS packages. Yep, we did that. The root directory package. After updating and saving the files. Wait, let's go to package.json real quick and make sure I did things correctly here. Package. Ah, okay. So we need to, I didn't update all the packages. So that we have basically things that are out of sync. So I updated the main package.json. Well, I didn't update the node module, submodules, or the different Yarn workspaces, excuse me. So let's go ahead and do that. Update that to 0.5, update the router to 0.5. I don't think it says, so I've already done core. And again, I'm skipping 0.4 and going straight to 0.5. That might be a bigger mistake, but we'll find out here. Well, I guess we could go to 4 and make this a slow upgrade instead of going all the way there. So then we want to get RedwoodJS API to 0.4 as well. And then RedwoodJS core, which will be in our top level package.json. So let me close these two. Package.json. Let's send that one to 4, not 5. Go ahead and stop the server, and we'll run npm install again. Go through, and while that's running, won't the chevron to 0.5 anyway? The chevron. Oh, it might. I don't remember what that does. So it might go it to 0.5. Is that saying like only bump them to the minor version number? There's a breaking change on version to 0.5. I'm sure there will be breaking changes at every step. So we may need to remove this chevron here and just lock it down to 0.4 to see if we can get a version of this up and deployed. Let me go look over here. All right. So following your lead, Thomas, I'm going to drop the chevron from all these. The one that might need the latest is 2.0 beta 2. I'm going to leave that one alone. All right, so now our package.json locked to 0.4, locked to 0.4, locked to 0.4. Cool. MIT Kyoto, thanks for the heads up on the 0.5 breaking change. Let's just see if we can get things running on 0.4. So I'm going to do another npm install. And hopefully this will lock things to 0.4.0. Okay, that went strangely fast. So then yarn redwood dev, let's run it locally and see if we can actually get things running here. Ooh, all right. It's that same file again. It's causing problems. I can already tell. API source function GraphQL.js. Let's go see if he mentions that in the list of things to change. After updating and saving the files, install the packages from the root directory. Already updated the packages. Okay, let's go see if, so the next step real quick would be GitHub. Let's go to the GitHub RedwoodJS repo and see if we can pull this specific file. So if anybody has a direct link to that file, that'd be awesome. But I'm gonna go look for it. GraphQL.js, because I didn't write this. This was handed to me by GraphQL. So it's gotta be in the repo here. So I'm gonna do a T GraphQL.js. Could also regenerate a new GraphQL file. Whew, that doesn't look exactly right. Create GraphQL handler. Oops. Graph. Can spell, swear. Code. Okay, that's the server. Huh. So let's go create a 0.4 cd documents code. All right, cd dot dot. Okay, so create React app. Go back to the beginning of the tutorial. Yarn create Redwood app. Okay, hopefully that creates with Redwood 0.4. Whoops. Command failed. Redwood blog already exists. Yeah, Redwood blog 2. And then I'm going to compare the contents of this GraphQL file with the other one. I was hoping to find it exactly in the RedwoodJS Redwood directory, and maybe they have a separate, there it is, create Redwood app. I bet this actually has the real file in it. So let's see, that would be GraphQL.js. Hey, hey. I'm just going to copy paste it, get raw, copy, paste. It's that import DB line. So one of the things I noticed while I was going through the tutorial is that this import DB line was sprinkled around in various places, such as in the services files, and I just kind of ignored it at the time, but I think that probably needed now. So I think it's actually in the services files here. We're going to need that import DB. So this is like totally from memory here. I don't know if this is actually going to work or not. Oops. All right, back over to our terminal. Let me restart yarn redwood dev. Still failed to compile. What's the failure this time? Woo-wee! Upgrade challenges. Okay, so there it is. Okay, now we're at the top. So again, scrolling down to see where it's actually failing. It looks like a similar failure. Yeah. Cannot find module Babel plugin macros. So this GraphQL.js is exactly the same. All right, well, let's take a look at our new create React app. Oh no, it's at 0.5. Okay. So we're actually a little ahead of where we want to be for this one. Oops. cd dot dot cd redwood blog 2. Oh, bummer. Okay, so we've got about, let's see where we're at. Let's take a step back here. We got about 7 minutes left. We have a RedwoodJS 0.25 application that is not deploying on Netlify because Prisma doesn't appear to be appropriately set up. And so what I was doing just a few minutes ago was seeing if I could just upgrade easily to 0.4. Doesn't look like 0.4 is an easy upgrade. There was some breaks there, specifically in the way migrations were handled with Prisma. So we could either continue to beat our heads up against the upgrade path, either upgrading to 0.4 or 0.5, or we could take a newly generated 0.5 app and copy over our code that we had written in 0.25 and then deploy that. or we could try to get our 025 application Prisma to work on Netlify and actually be set up appropriately. So how about let's spend the next 5 minutes. There's no way we're going to be able to complete copying our code over to a new 0.5 app in the next 5 minutes and get it deployed as well. So let's just spend 5 minutes seeing if we can fix the 0.25 Prisma in Netlify. So it seemed like what was going on here is our Prisma client is not appropriately initialized and maybe not even appropriately set up. So what we were seeing in this Rob's comment here, Rob Cameron was saying, try to do yarn RW DB generate. So let's see how we can get access to a terminal in Netlify and actually run that command and see if that just happens to fix everything. Check release notes for 0.5 on GitHub. Yep, I definitely will. I mean, I'm still working, MIT Kyoto, I'm still working with 0.25 here. This deployed application is a 0.2.5 deployed application. So I need to read through the release notes on 0.4 and 0.5, probably just 0.5, and just start there afresh and leave behind our 0.24 code, or 0.25 code. But I just want to see if I can get this application that's already deployed actually running appropriately. So let's see. How do I issue a command line command in Netlify? I know how to do this in Heroku, but today's my first day playing with Netlify. So we got our deploys here. Would probably, these are the Lambda functions that are running. We have one running in production. There's GraphQL. See, the thing is, we would actually want to run that yarn W. Maybe Rob was referring to running that. Yeah, this is from March 11th. It's more than a month ago. Normally, you shouldn't have to run this command manually. Matt never gets back to him. Not real hopeful here. All right. Run command locally. We only have 3 minutes to see if we can fix this. Netlify CLI. So that's how to interact with Netlify from our command line, which is not what I want. Maybe take it off that. Yeah, it could be a build command. So let's see if we go to our deploys, deploy settings, continuous deployment. Build command is yarn rw db up. Isn't that what he just said to run? Yarn rw db generate. Okay. So let's go back over here, edit the settings. We'll do yarn rw db generate and db up and build. All right, so let's see if that works. Click save. This will be the last thing we'll try today, and then we'll next time I will take a look at moving things over from 0.25 to 0.5, and I'll make sure to read through the release notes. Okay, trigger the deploy the site. Import Prisma client from, here's the upgrade from 0.1 to 0.3. Thomas is saying that here's the upgrade from 0.1 to 0.3, which also has the DB imports and a file that you may be missing. Import Prisma client from Prisma client export. Okay. Yeah, that's probably right. Those DB exports or imports are new to me. I'm gonna go ahead and comment that one out since, well, we're on, locally I'm on 0.4, so I'm gonna 0.4. I'm gonna roll back to 0.25. All right, we have a few more minutes here. Let's see if this actually works. netlify build. On pre-build command, there's our plugin functions core. All right, now it's running that db up command. Wait. That's not running the command I wanted it to run. It's also saying that the command was killed by sigfault. So I think this actual, when I look at the migrations, it looks like the Prisma migrations are not actually running. So that appears to be the legit problem here, is that our generating the Prisma client is failing. Okay, so tell you what, thank you guys for hanging out. This has been a lot of fun. We've gone through the entire RedwoodJS tutorial all the way down to deployment. Unfortunately, when we started the RedwoodJS tutorial a few weeks ago, we started on 0.2.5. And so RedwoodJS is already on 0.5. Again, this is preview level software, folks. It's moving really fast. Lots of breaking changes coming down. So not at all surprised to find out that when we get that a few weeks later, the things that I started on a few weeks ago are no longer working. In some ways, that's a good sign for the framework that it's moving really quickly. And remember, we're pre 1.0. And so the one thing that failed is we weren't able to get the application deployed to netlify on the front end. Just some complications around Prisma. So the next thing I'm hoping to dig into maybe next week is actually getting a 0.5 application deployed in netlify and kind of leave behind this older 0.25 code base instead of going through the attempted upgrade cycle, going from 0.25 to 0.3 to 0.4 and then eventually to 0.5. Enough breaking changes along that route that I'd rather avoid the breaks entirely and just start fresh from the new place. So thank you guys so much for hanging out and offering your comments. Thanks, Thomas and MIT Kyoto, for y'all's comments and hanging out in the chat during this live stream. This has been super fun. In case you're just now tuning in, there is a part 1 and a part 2 of this live stream where I spent time going through the beginning and the middle of this tutorial, and this is the final live stream where we got through the end of the RedwoodJS tutorial. So look for more fun stuff on Thursday mornings at 8 a.m. Pacific on Coding with Jess, possibly building new things with RedwoodJS, possibly continuing the Spotify new releases app that I've been working on. Feel free to go to my YouTube channel and check out some of those other recordings if you're interested in seeing that. But it's been super fun. I look forward to next Thursday, and we'll see you then.